Thanks for joining us again for this session. It's part of our ongoing conversation with Gary and Wilma Davidson, looking back at their 38 years of ministry in Ireland and trying to glean from that some of the principles that just last forever, that can affect so much of us, that we can learn from in church planting and in ministry in general. Now, in this session, we're going to focus on Gary's approach to team building. And the impact that had on his ministry. If you're joining us for the first time on this session, I'd encourage you to go take a look back at some of the earlier ones we recorded, where Gary and Wilma gave us an overview and some really good insights into from the beginning of their ministry in Ireland, going back to May 1980, that lasted for 38 years. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button so that you'll be kept up to date with new sessions as they're coming out. So, Gary, it's great to be with you again. And thanks again for your ongoing commitment to this. When you and Wilma and your family arrived in 1980, you had in mind to establish a city centre church that would have the potential to impact the most people possible. Set it up in the capital city, it will have the biggest impact and the greatest number of people. But you were essentially on your own, like with your family, you were on your own. You didn't have a team around you to support you and help this work. And you were also moving into a new culture. You had done your preparation in North America, in the United States, and then you were coming to a land that was an awful lot of Irish people in it for some strange reason.
Seemed to be.
Seemed to be.
Yes.
So I'm conscious that most church plants in Ireland today are born out of an existing, or if you like to call it, a mother church, where church planters would have the time and the space to prayerfully consider and build their core team. So they would leave with, or they would leave the mother church with a team ready to set up, with a leadership team in place almost. And you were in a different position.
Very, very different. I mentioned in one of the sessions, you don't waste the wait. And whenever I think about our early years there, when we arrived, I had a passion to plant a church, but obviously needed to understand the culture, needed to gather a few bodies around me, and so we came in, and of course the Catholic Charismatic Renewal was starting to tail off a bit in 1980. It's interesting, Joe. I was in a meeting only a few months before I arrived in Ireland, and a lady came to me and had a prophetic word. She said, "I'm sending you among a people who are like sheep without a shepherd or a pastor." And of course, I'm a pastor. And so when we arrived there, we have all of these beautiful people who have been touched powerfully by the Holy Spirit. You, one of them, had an encounter with God. And yet nobody really to teach the word to them, because there wasn't that emphasis placed on the word. It was much more experiential,
Yeah.
right?
Yes, that's right.
But we need to get a foundation of the word. And so when I arrived, we began to gather people through Bible teaching. The other thing was we were able to get a copy of the Cross and Switchblade, 16 millimeter copy. Most people never heard of that. And we hauled it all over, sharing the story of the Cross and Switchblade, David Wilkerson, Nicky Cruz Teen Challenge. And I look back, and the relationships that begin to build through that. And to this day, I meet people who have who would tell me, I came to their school when they were 13. In fact, our family doctor, Linda Latham, said to me one day, "You know why I'm involved with you in Teen Challenge?" I said, "No." She said, "You came to our school, our Sacred Heart School, and shared Cross and Switchblade. You prayed and you gave away those books." And I was 14. 20 years later, she shares that story. So God was working in a very different way. today, and when St. Mark's and our other churches send out church plants, daughter congregations, they raise up a group as their DNA, even finance them and set them out. Well, I didn't have anybody.
Yes.
So, but through that, and Joe, I showed that film 100 times. I began to hate that film.
Well,
I mean, I was so fed up. I could see every flaw in the film. And
you probably could have acted in the remake.
I could have done a Nicky Cruz or a David Wilkerson
Yeah.
pretty quickly. And but you know, God was building relationships, and it began to attract people. And then I would attend meetings. I would just show up at meetings, and we cannot forget the power of the Holy Spirit. Because I remember being in one meeting, and I simply, the Lord spoke a word to me. I got up and shared the word. Imagine this, Joe. This was in late 1980, early 81. There's 300 people. They're mainly people that have come out of or involved in the charismatic renewal, probably 98% Roman Catholic. And the Lord speaks a word, and you remember those days, it was kind of free for all.
Oh, yeah.
And people
Yeah.
jumped up, and sometimes it was God, and sometimes it was bad Irish stew than before. But I shared a word that God had given me, a word of knowledge, and I'll never forget somebody stood up and said, you know that guy in the back there that sounds like J.R. Ewing? That dates us, doesn't it, from old Dallas days? How did he know that about me?
Yeah.
Well, it was the Holy Spirit. And a man came to me and he said, you're a Bible teacher? I said, I am. He said, can I bring people to your home?
Okay. Yeah.
And so we started building, because I'm a relational animal, and we both are aware of that. And so I began to build those relationships. And I would have to say, we're talking about team. From the very beginning, I was looking for people that I could gather around, that I could mentor.
And wasn't it a blessing to have the availability of the cross and the switchblade?
Oh,
because
absolutely.
that actually, you could go anywhere with that.
I could.
And that was acceptable. What an amazing and inspiring story, by the way, as well. And I've seen that, of course. And that has blessed so many people in Ireland, you showing that. But it did create the relationships. And that allowed you to start pulling people together. But it's interesting you say right from day one, you were looking for people that you could form into a team to start to actually start your first church.
Well, it was going to have to be more than my four and no more.
Yes.
We had our family.
Yes.
Our family of five: Wilma and Christy, Mark, and Dana. Dana was only 2.5 years old, and so we tried a couple of churches, and found it pretty dry and pretty difficult.
Okay.
I could have coped, but the children were bored out of their head. And so we started doing communion in our home, just with the children on Sunday morning. And people found out and said, can we come and break bread with you?
Yeah.
And so that starts at, and of course, I've got Wilma, this person with this enormous gift of hospitality. And and you know, Joe, Jesus did a lot of things around food. And so around the table, talking, laughing. In fact, I remember a young lady saying to Wilma and I, she came out of a very dysfunctional family, very difficult marriage, and she always thought, I never want to get married. I never want family like I've come up in. And she said, I watched you and Wilma and your family, and I thought, now if I could have a family like that. So we were actually mentoring.
Yes,
Isn't that
and modeling.
beautiful?
You were
Yeah.
mentoring and modeling.
Yeah,
Yeah.
modeling through our own family. But I've always had building team. We're talking about building team. Somewhere along the way, I developed this thought of the three I's, basically being intentional, informational, and investing. So intentionally, I began to look for people. I began to say, is this young man, young lady, can I bring them along? So I was very intentional, and always, as you know, Wilma said, we came here to work ourselves out of a job. So to do that, we had to raise up a team.
Yes.
We had to mentor. We had to recognize their gift, see who the anointing rested upon. You know, we talk about ordination. Well, we don't ordain anybody. He does.
Yeah.
We simply recognize the gift that is there. So I intentionally began to gather people around. I tried never to make a trip without, if my family wasn't with me, a young man or a young couple with me. And of course, you're building relationship
Yes.
through that. And then you got to invest. You got to be intentional, but you've got to invest time and resources. And so I don't know how many young men and women I sent away to Bible college,
Okay.
paid all their fees.
Yeah.
Thankfully, I was able to raise funds to do that from our great American churches that were committed to us and so on. And of course, out of that group, some of them come back and served, others never did.
Okay.
But, you know, cast your bread on the waters, it shall come back. And so you had to invest, and I had to invest time.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're going to build relationships, you gotta make time for it. You got to make space for it. And then, and in that, I call it information, which is actually history. Because if I'm building a team and I bring people around me, and I understand somebody comes from a very dysfunctional background, I understand somebody comes from a very difficult situation, then I'm going to be able to relate to them.
Okay.
And if I know their history, I'll also find out what their love language is.
Yes.
You know, I work with individuals where their love language is gifts. So we make sure gifts show up.
Okay.
I still do that.
Yeah.
And if I understand, for instance, working with some of the fellows that come out of the paramilitary background in Northern Ireland, uh, I often say if one of them, Packy Hamilton, that we all love and know so well, uh, I often say with Packy, if Packy and I are somewhere and a gunshot goes off, my response and his is totally different.
Yeah.
I was raised hunting and so on, so I would just look around. He's going to duck his head because he's been shot at a few times. And that's a simple explanation of if I understand history and I know what he's going to do.
Yes.
And so if I'm working with a team as it expands, I understand the personalities of that team, and I understand when pressure comes how individuals will react.
What's striking me about what you're saying, because you mentioned the intention, being intentional, investing time, and then gathering the information. It's not gathering information, but understanding the information,
Yes.
the backgrounds of people. What strikes me about the way you led and the way you drew stuff together is there was a lot of serious thought went into this. There was a lot of serious prayer, obviously,
Yeah.
but there was the understanding of the people. You were always committed to people. People were always number one. There was, as it should be. I mean, if we look to the great commandments, love God with all your heart, love your neighbor as yourself, that relational thing is way up there on God's agenda. But you understood that. And it was part of who you are to actually go after people, understand people, invest time with people,
Yes.
understand their background, and be very intentional about that. And that is, I would say, probably one of the major keys to your longevity and your success over time. And there were others as well, but
Yes.
that was one of the major things.
I remember we was hiring someone to come on part-time staff in administrative role. And I remember one of a young lady that worked with us for years, was still very close to. Uh, she said, "You need to understand something about Gary. If it's paper or people, people come first."
Yes.
And knew this individual had to have all the paper in place. She said, "If you work with Gary, you'll never have it in place." Perhaps a weakness,
Yeah.
but also a strength, because I don't care how much paper you got. If you don't have people, you haven't done anything.
But it also means then, and we're hoping to glean from this conversation some tips and techniques and advice that others can take up. So it does mean that if you're a very strong people person, make sure you have somebody on the team who can take care
Oh,
of the
yeah, that's
paper,
right.
because the paperwork can be essential, even to comply with things like the charity
Oh,
regulator, to
absolutely.
comply with revenue rules and all sorts of things, paying taxes, getting all those things squared away, that you need people to make sure those things are done. So look beyond yourself for the gifts that aren't, that they weren't your
Yes.
primary gifts. You look to others to get that done.
This in our own relationship, it reminds me whenever I knew, a number of people knew, it had been spoken prophetically, it was obvious what was happening, that I was going to have to go to the nation, and I was going to have, God was calling us to pull together a national network. And I remember you spoke to me about it very strongly. I think it was actually at Mazda, and said, Gary, there's coming a time you're going to have to move away from St. Mark's. And I remember saying to you, I can't do that without you, because you have a great administrative gift that I didn't have. And your first response, if I remember it, was, well, I don't know that the Lord's called me to do that. But I think because of our relationship, our mutual respect, uh, you recognized that and said, "No, I'll help you do it." That wasn't what you intended to do, but we look back now, what came together with our council and the whole thing coming together from the north that we never envisioned initially. We only saw us in the republic, not in the north.
So essentially, what I'm gleaning from what you're saying is that there were strengths that you had, which were very clear. You were very people focused, which is an incredible blessing, and essential, I would say, in somebody who's planting a work to reach people.
Yeah.
But you needed people around you to take care of paperwork, to take care of the other things that would probably frustrate you and give you a
Oh,
headache. Yeah.
absolutely. Would
Um,
give me
yeah,
my migraines probably.
probably. But that's the importance of team, is to balance out the team, to make sure you that it's not all Bible teachers you have on your team. You need a broad team to take care of everything that needs to get done. You mentioned that we were sort of coming to the end of charismatic renewal, and that was beginning to wane slightly. Um, but there were these people who had come through that, who who had developed a new life in Jesus, and they needed a home to be able to express that fully. But amongst them, there were some strong leaders.
There was one or two or three.
Probably a few anyway, and God blessed.
Yes.
That was God's blessing. Some of those wanted to work with you, and you began to pull some of those together. Like, I'm talking about the really, really early days, the first
Yes. Oh,
days.
yeah, yeah.
And so you ended up with a team of really good people. I mean,
Yes.
really good people,
Yes, absolutely.
strong people, but often with competing sense of vision.
Yes.
That wasn't anybody's fault. That was
No.
because people wanted to come together, but several people would have had a different sense of vision of what that might be. So you started off with a team of who wanted to work together, but visions might have been slightly different. But eventually you ended up with a core cohesive team that was pulling together really strongly, with things like mutual respect, mutual
Mm.
accountability, a shared sense of vision, a shared sense of purpose. How did that transition work? I mean, that was like almost turning the impossible into something beautiful.
Yeah.
But and I don't mean that as disrespect to the
No.
early days,
No.
because these were godly people.
Yes,
There's no
absolutely.
question. Talk to us a little bit about how you saw that transition happening. What were the challenges in that? Was there ever any conflicts that
Oh,
had to
it
be
was never
addressed?
any conflict. No. It was even navigating the whole uh, Roman Catholic culture and understand that it was a culture as well as a denomination, and trying to understand that, and individuals bringing that with them was some things that I might have struggled with. Uh, I remember the whole thing about uh, the role of Mary within the Catholic Church and how she was viewed and so on. Some of those aspects I would have not been comfortable with, for want of a better term. And I remember Liz Booth said to me when we began to build a relationship, and of course then they became two of our key leaders. I remember being in their home, and she said, "What do we do about Mary? What do you do about Mary?" And I said, "Oh, well, maybe I'm not totally comfortable with you on that, but let's not worry about it." And I moved on.
Okay.
And she said, "You never ever brought that up to me." So somehow I had an ability to know everybody didn't see things like I saw them,
Yes.
but somehow I had an ability uh, I can tolerate the tension. Uh, I remember a number of years ago feeling uh, that I always lived with a lot of tension, especially those early years. And individuals that couldn't live with the tension didn't make it.
Okay.
So I didn't have everybody together exactly believing like I did.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, it's interesting because I think it's useful for me to add something here that I
yes,
specifically remember. I think what you had was the ability to understand the key issues and to let the other things slide, because they weren't the key issues that was going to unite and build something cohesive. And that the other lesser or second priority or
yeah,
lower
that's right.
priority issues would probably take care of themselves as the Holy Spirit worked
That's
with
right.
us. So it wasn't that you agreed with everyone in the room. It was that you understood what the key issues were and put your focus on the key issues and let the other things slide. I think that's actually a very, very useful thing for young leaders to learn.
Uh, you know, one of our notes when we were preparing was choose the hill you want to die on.
Yes.
And I remember an individual going and working with a church that was very traditional and knew we needed to move it on if they were going to be able to connect with their local community. And but it was uh, and asked the men not to wear ties, literally.
Okay.
And but these men, from their background, Sunday was the day they wore their suits.
Okay.
And it was important. And we remember in Mark's,
Yeah.
Leo told me, always wore a suit and always wore a tie on Sunday morning. That was his background and culture. And this individual insisted that they not wear a suit and said they were being in rebellion.
Okay.
They weren't being in rebellion. It was their culture.
Yeah.
What difference to make? And I remember saying, "You won't die on tie heel?"
There was a story you told of there was a young man who approached you
Yes.
in St. Mark's and accused you of compromising. Can you tell us that story?
Yes. Yes. It was on a Sunday morning. Things were going fantastic. At least I thought. And young man, as I'm walking out, walks up the aisle, about 18 or 19. He said, "Who are some of these people here?" Something like that. And I said, "Well, they're people that hungry for Jesus." And I knew where he was trying to go, and I refused to go there. And he kept saying, "There are people here that go to Mass Saturday night and come here on Sunday. You're the biggest problem in the country because you compromise." And okay. So I said, "Look, I'm an elder in this church and you're out of order." And of course he says, "Well, that's what you do." And he stormed out, which was fine. We didn't need him. And I walked to the back and there's a guy sitting over on the left and he just sitting there. And I woke up and said, "Hello, I'm Pastor Gary Davidson." And he said, "I know who you are." He said, "Who are these people?" I thought, "What did I do wrong? Why did I get out of bed this morning?" And I said, "What do you mean, who are these people?" I knew where he was going. He said, "These are people who are Catholic." And I said, "Well, in the country, 94%, there's probably a few here."
Yes.
And, I wouldn't take the bait. And he said, "You know what? These are all people that many of them have probably left the Catholic Church." These were his words. "You're the biggest problem in this country."
You got that
So
twice in a
I
row.
got it twice within 10 minutes.
Right.
And so it was kind of like nobody was happy with me.
Yeah.
Because on either side, one side could see what was taking place, all these people coming to the Lord, probably going to end up leaving the church they had been traditionally been a part of. And then somebody else saying, "I didn't make it strict enough."
Okay. Yeah.
And But I think I understood there was a culture there.
Yeah.
And to tell people to leave what went back generations in their life, how foolish is that?
Yeah.
Why would they leave the largest thing to come up part of what was basically a church in the middle of Dublin, led by this American? And so we had to give them space.
Yeah.
So I think that's living with attention.
Yeah.
And I was willing to live with it. I knew guys, excellent young men and women that led other fellowships that tend to be quite smaller, and they couldn't live with it. And I don't know why I had that capacity.
Yeah. And I think one of the principles, let's say, it may not be a principle, but it's certainly worth noting. I've been in many conversations where we've talked about numbers and people saying, it's not numbers, it's the quality of relationship. It's how deep, it's not how wide. And actually, I think that's wrong. I think that discipleship is important, spiritual formation is essential, but numbers are critical because God loves the whole world.
Yes.
So we want to bring as many people into the kingdom as possible. To start weeding out when people want to go on with God over stuff that is, that at the end of the day, doesn't really matter. And I think you got that right. And that allowed you to grow to numbers that hadn't been achieved in the country before then.
I was blessed by the pastor that won me to the Lord. He always emphasized love. And I remember he said, you catch a fish, let Jesus clean them.
Yeah.
And because the work of sanctification, which continues in all of our lives, God has to speak. I remember P.J. Booth sharing a testimony that he always loved cigars. I couldn't imagine it.
Yeah.
And I remember him saying he was in a service once, and I'd never said anything to him about it. I never thought about it, to be honest. And he said he was in a service, and the Lord spoke to him to tithe. And he said, Lord, I can't afford to tithe. And he said, and he thought about what he spent on cigars. And he said, and the Lord took the desire away. I never spoke to the other way. And from that day forward, I mean, the way God worked.
That's just incredible.
Yeah,
that's
and he shared that with me 20 years after. He said that happened sitting to your left on a Sunday morning as the offerings basket went by. I mean, it's his church, Joe.
Yeah. And again, it goes back to this, and I'm actually a real believer in this, and it may not be fashionable with everyone, this whole concept of getting people to belong
before they believe,
before they behave.
That's right.
And, there's a work of discipleship, there's a work of sanctification, there's the work of the Holy Spirit in people's lives. We're not looking for perfect people to join our church. We're looking for imperfect people to join an already imperfect church.
Right.
So,
well, you and I are there, so
can't be perfect then. Yeah, that's right. So I would say then, going back to the question that stirred this wonderful conversation was the transition from the early team of your core team of people with maybe contrary or competing might be too harsh. But it wasn't a unity of vision, but there was a unity of, a team wanted to do something.
Yes.
But that early team did transition to a team with a cohesive vision. And it was probably through learning from you to see what are the essentials and let go of the things that aren't essential that began to bring people around to a way of thinking. And probably you might have lost a few in the process, people who couldn't actually make that journey, but those who could became the cohesive team,
leaders,
the key leaders.
Well, if you don't have team unless you've got a joint vision, unless we've got a goal, and we've all got to submit and believe this is the goal. So the goal was to plant churches. And others, some wanted to have prayer meetings, some wanted to have Bible studies, but really weren't into that. Well, we were into church planting, and if you'll remember, when the network came together, and then we had a crisis, in only a few years in when we became an All Ireland AGI that's was become CCI today. Uh, we had some people, we had good men, good families that they were not happy with us, and we realized that we had we had focused on too many things. We're
Right.
going to do this, this, and this. And I remember you came to me, you said, there's two things we do really well. We raise up and release leaders, and we plant churches. We need to just focus on that, leave everything else. And I think we look today and we see that was like a prophetic word in the midst of a bit of a chaos and conflict. And it just shows that out of conflict,
Yes. Yeah.
God weeds some things off. He pairs some things out. So some individuals just had to say, this is not the way I feel to go, Gary,
Yeah.
and we would bless them and still have relationship with many of them. Agree to disagree agreeably, hopefully.
And I also think that's a very valuable thing to recognize and to aspire to for many people is, look, if people are going to go their separate ways, bless them, let them go,
That's right.
maintain the relationship.
Yeah.
You may not work together. They might have that God might be calling them to something different. Bless them, let them go, but maintain the friendship because we're still brothers and sisters in Christ. And that's something you could always do.
Well, God, no doubt, the Lord help me. I had a call recently from an individual that led to the Lord probably nearly 50 years ago, over 50 years ago, here in the States, and found out recently he was passing away, and somebody called me, and I wasn't able to go to him. And they called me to say he passed away, and this individual and I, and he and his wife and I, we worked together for about a year, and then we went separate ways. It was a bit painful,
Okay.
but anyway, he went on and became a pastor in another group and so on. But a friend of mine called me and he said, "Do you remember Cecil?" I said, "Oh yeah, I remember Cecil. Lady with the Lord around his table, he, veteran and so on." And he said, I would go visit him in the nursing home, and he'd say, "Did you ever hear from Gary Davidson?" He'd
Right.
say, "Oh yeah, Gary's a missionary, whatever." He said, "Gary loved me into the kingdom."
Wow.
Now,
Wow.
Joe, if we can get people to say that about
Yes.
us, and how I did it, because he had a very difficult and different personality from mine,
Yes.
and but God, knowing that we are all but dust, He
Yeah.
hath compassion on us. And I thought, well, I got that right
Yeah.
somehow.
I also remember several discussions about the model for leadership, and we look back at scripture, Timothy was out church planting, um, Paul was giving him advice, the setup of the model of elders, deacons. The way that's interpreted today is slightly different, but we still have that sense of overall responsibility for the health of a church, for the direction it's taking, for its theological base, for its spirituality, for the way it's discipling. But then you also have, so you have a group of people who need to look after that, and we would have called those elders.
Yes.
But you also have a group of people who need to take care of the practical things of running the church, maybe taking care of finances, maybe taking care of um, waiting at tables as is
Yes.
described in the Bible. And that was the way we sort of looked at elders and
They
deacons.
did, yeah.
I think today we're looking more at a leadership team
That's right.
is the common way that's done today. What advice would you give now to new churches forming as to the way they look at forming a leadership team?
Well, I would have a minister here in the States for 9 years would have been in, I think it's the Presbyterian model. And so you have a church, you have a pastor, you have maybe staff, you have a board of deacons, your board of directors, we might call them. And so the governance is with them. And if you've got a strong visionary pastor and you've got a group of deacons that are not very visionary, then obviously we're going to have tension and conflict. And somehow a visionary leader needs to manage that, work through it. Hopefully they can. Sometimes they can't, and we just have to move on. But so I came to Ireland, and we don't have a lot of people with evangelical backgrounds, and I looked at some models that were there, and I love this eldership model, which recognized first among equals. In other words, the elder, who in my case ended up being seen very quickly as the pastor. The elder is the visionary leader, but works and they works cohesively with the eldership. And then, of course, we recognize the need of people to manage the tables according to in the book of Acts and 6. And so we went with that model. And so that worked very well for us because the more democratic or Presbyterian model was that the people had membership and they voted in their leaders and so on. Well, we didn't have people.
Yeah.
And we certainly, the people we had coming in, you have people coming out from very addictive lifestyle, you have people coming very dysfunctional. They didn't know what church life was all about, and they need to be mentored and so on. So certainly, I think in the first 20, 30 years of a church's existence, I think you need a model like that recognizes a strong visionary leader, and there's space for him within reason. In other words, you got an eldership because I came in those early years with some ideas, and we would talk it through. We'd feel, well, we want to do that, but not now, and it's not time. And God really helped us. I mean, we've talked about there were decisions we were going to make that were going to be pretty radical. First time we brought a woman into eldership, we had people walk out, and but we felt it's not about gender, it's about the anointing. We recognized it. We placed an individual in. Some people weren't comfortable about it, but we knew God had called us. But that was a process. We discussed that for a couple of years.
Yes.
And I think we found the mind of God back to the book of Acts and Antioch and reaching the Jewish church, basically recognized in the Gentile church. And James said, it seemeth good to us and the Holy Ghost.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think where a lot of times we just somehow talked, argued, discussed, everybody gave their point, and finally, this is good. This is what we must do. And we made those decisions. I came out of that model, which it was made the governance very different from what we had, but I knew that wouldn't work in Ireland.
Yes.
And I don't know how I knew that wouldn't work. I just did.
But I think the key principle coming out of all of that is that and I would say particularly to somebody who's planting a church or is coming into a new pastoral lead role, whatever the title is, do have good, strong people around you. Don't be afraid of having strong people.
Oh, no,
That there needs to be that governance level, but they need to share the vision.
Oh, yeah. That's be part of the vision.
That's
but they can't be yes men.
Yes.
And
sorry, no.
This is a good learning for young couples out there trying to plant a church. We would bring people in to walk with the elders for a year.
Yes.
There was no commitment on our part that they would be there permanently, and there was no commitment on their part that they would be there permanently. So let's walk together for a year and see how this works. And I remember we brought in PJ and Noel.
Yeah.
And and obviously a gifting, very different giftings of those two men. And I remember in one of our first meetings or two, you and I disagreed about something. And I remember Noel said, I didn't know anybody ever disagreed with Gary. But what a learning experience for him.
Yes.
And he saw that we had mutual respect. He saw what, by the grace of God, we were building together, but he also saw that we could disagree agreeably.
Yeah.
And he just said, then I remember meeting on that disagreed, and PJ jumped in and he said, Joe, you're wrong.
Yeah.
And he said, I didn't speak for 6 months. I was afraid. But you talk about a mentoring opportunity
Yes.
for him to see that interplay and he would see us leading the meetings, God using us, you leading the meeting, I'm speaking whatever was going on, and then he watches this interplay, and he thinks it changed his idea of leadership.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think one leader said this idea that we go into a room and we all clap each other on the back and we're all great buddies and we all agree on everything and we have to and so on. He said, no, this is life and death. Decisions we make may determine whether the flats behind St. Mark's will be reached with the gospel.
Yes.
So to disagree was strong. There's something wrong if we don't disagree.
Yeah.
But we also come together, agree, and we walk out of that meeting with an arm around each other and said, regardless, we want to reach and fulfill the vision.
It's interesting to consider the shift you had to make, yourself and Wilma and your children, coming from having prepared in North America, to come over to Europe, and to adjust all of your thinking. How big a shift was that for you and your family?
Well, it was enormous because I didn't have anybody to mentor me.
Yes.
I didn't have an apostolic oversight. Now, I went and looked for them. I remember dealing with issues I wasn't sure, and I would find somebody that knew. But I don't know, except I really loved the Irish people.
Okay.
And had a great heart for them. And they'd come in with all of their background, traditional understanding and of serving the Lord. I remember my good friend Pat Murphy, one of our pastors, said he always prayed to Mary because he didn't feel holy enough to pray to Jesus. Well, what's wrong with that? You know what I'm saying? No, you don't pray to Mary, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do know. I understand the thinking. Absolutely. I understand that thinking.
Yes.
Yeah, completely.
And I remember feeling compassion. And he said, when somebody said, we want to honor Mary and bless her. I mean, what a gift she brought to the world. And yet you don't have to go, one of our friends said, you don't have to go around the world. You can go straight to Jesus. And he said it was so difficult the first time.
Right.
I prayed because I felt so unworthy. And so I'm suddenly looking at this man's humility.
Yes.
I mean, it wasn't that he was heretical.
Yes.
It wasn't that he was into something that was, I didn't agree with his approach, but from somehow I began to see what he saw.
And his heart was right.
And his heart was right. And of course he got a revelation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so somehow my love and respect and the Lord helped me see that. And then of course, Joe, one of the most important, essential things we did on our journey was we took in Mary, our Irish daughter. We call her our Irish daughter. We never formally adopted her, but we took Mary into our home. She was born in an unwed mother's home, has no idea who her parents were, was in one of those terrible religious homes. We all know the stories.
Yes.
They're out there. Tragic. What happened to thousands. And she was one of the victims. And somebody brought her to us. We had her in a Teen Challenge girls' home. Of course, it was an institution. She came out of an institution. She hated an institution. She broke every rule. I couldn't put her out. I took her home. I said, Wilma, I got Mary Murphy in the car. Wilma said, well, bring her in. I said, so we agreed to bring her in for 3 days, and that was 44 years ago. And so now we stayed with her.
Yes.
We live with her. But somebody came to me once and said, we knew you loved us when you took one of our own in.
Wow.
And somebody said, how did you know that was God? Did you pray? I never prayed once about it.
Right.
I just think sometimes, do you have to pray?
Sometimes it's obvious.
Yeah. She didn't have a place to live.
Yeah.
And of course, our daughter Dana, who was 3 when she came in, she does not know life without Mary.
Okay.
and talk about, and then of course there's 18 years between them, and the relationship they have that we all have, and of course now we have Abigail, our first granddaughter, but somebody said that to me one time, when you took in one of our own, we knew you loved us, and I
Well,
thought,
there's
man,
a principle there,
there is.
Gary. There's a real principle. If you're going to minister to people, make sure you love them. It's not going to work unless you do. It's that love and commitment you had. It started off as a burden,
Yes,
but I think from everything I'm hearing from
yeah,
you, and over the years as well as in these few sessions, everything I'm hearing from you was a deep love, a burden for the Irish people, but a deep love for them.
yeah.
And that's the thing that carried you through some of the difficulties, I'm sure.
What kept me from leaving?
Yeah,
I didn't want to leave these people. I loved them,
yeah,
you know, and I didn't want to leave them, and many of them had made a journey to come to us, and they had left everything that was comfortable and secure,
yes,
and were ostracized. In those early years,
yes,
individuals who left were ostracized, often by their families. Unfortunately, I think it's very different today, but they were ostracized, and so I suddenly walk off and leave that? How could I?
yeah,
In fact, when we left, whenever we came back in 84 to 85, we got very close to Mary, and somebody said she sat out on a wall at the airport and cried for 2 hours, and she kept saying they will never come back. And of course we did. And you know, that healed something in her life. She had been abandoned, and then she thought it's happened again.
yeah,
Often when I leave her now and we're hugging her, we get ready to go to the airport, she'll say, "You're always leaving." And we laugh about it. But that was her life
yeah,
before she met us.
yeah. So resolving conflict. Let's talk a little bit about that.
We had so little, but anyway, we'll do our best, right? We'll do our best.
So I suppose there's many books written on resolving conflict, and there are approaches to it, and whatever. And it's probably even better if the team you're working with, and I'm talking about this in the context of team particularly, if the team you're working with understands the principles of conflict, and all of them are geared towards recognizing it and working to resolve from the start. But of course, that often takes some maturity.
It does, yeah.
And so to start off with, what was your approach to resolving conflict within the team?
I talked about the 3 I's, and one of them was information or history.
Yes.
And I think we understand someone's history, then we can know how they're going to probably react in situations, and we can give them space. I talk about when you strengthen relationships that there must be that moment once we build trust and we're working together. If God's called us together, we got to figure this out. If the Lord called you and I together to help bring that together, and along with a whole group of individuals that we have such love and respect for, and God called us together, so we had to figure out how to work it out. Because if we separated, we were being disobedient.
Yeah.
So there had to, and that was a journey that we could commit. And so, in that, we accept each other. Somehow we got to learn to accept each other unconditionally, because everybody has their little idiosyncrasies, little things that turn people off and so on, and those habits and so on. And I remember somebody saying to me, I knew what you were going to do in the situation, so I just always ignored it when you didn't respond right. So, and then I think in that there has to be the commitment to allow each other to fail. So, because some conflict comes when somebody fails and they've just messed up. And I think we have to remember we're all but dust. But there has to be that commitment, and that may mean it sometimes bringing in someone to mediate. I can't remember doing that I can remember doing that a few times. And sometimes that worked, and sometimes the mediator paid the price. So I only remember a few times that basically we would say people stormed out and didn't come back. And there was times, and I think there has to be that commitment, and that can be a problem for a pastor, that he will nearly compromise to keep people. And there had to be times I had to say, you know what, we can't do this journey together. You're not wrong, I'm not wrong. We're just not made for this journey. We can talk about, well, everybody couldn't go to the promised land. Well, then that says that what I'm doing is the promised land. What you're doing is not. No, sometimes our personalities just don't fit us.
Yeah.
And I meet people now that didn't journey with us, and we have a great relationship.
Yeah.
And we have huge mutual respect. So sometimes I think by the grace of God, we just have to say it's not working.
Yeah.
And it's painful.
Yeah.
But it also usually exposes some areas of my life that I need some help in.
I think also one of the principles I think that we talked about, certainly there, was this sense of mutual respect.
Yes.
So in a team, it's essential.
Yes.
And I think that's one of the things that was very important to you. So even in the times of conflict, maintaining that mutual respect, understanding that we're in disagreement on this, but actually our respect hasn't changed, can ultimately lead both parties to say, look, there has to be a way through this. Let's figure it out. And I'm sure that happened over and over again. If the respect breaks down, that's a different challenge altogether.
Yeah. And somebody probably has to move on.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we just have to, and there's a great illustration of this actually in Cork, and it's been said publicly a few times, so there's no reason. But I used to have Tom Burke come in and speak to our church planners, and I'd always say, you got to tell it warts and all.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I take my story and put it together in 30 minutes, it sounds like it was fantastic.
Yeah.
But we know the heartache. We know the time of what I call nearly the year of dying, where 8 people passed away, some of them tragically, that we had to walk through. So, yeah, it wasn't all peaches and cream by any stretch of imagination. But he worked together with another great friend, Nick Cassidy, and it didn't work. For several years, they tried to make it. They finally got to 60, and finally they agreed that, you know what, this is not working. And I don't know why that surprises us, because the first missionary team that went out, Paul and Barnabas, they had to come back and admit it wasn't working. Ever how they did it, they did. And then so what we got was 2 teams. So now you go to Cork, and you've got Pastor Nick has, I think, 400 to 600 people. Tom has, I don't know, 700 to 800 people. And Tom said that. When we were together, we had 60. When we were apart, we had 1,200, 1,400. So, as painful as it was, but I said this to someone the other day, if you expect to build without conflict, you need to get out of this. Because if the first church, we would all say God spoke powerfully, said Paul, and he said, set aside Barnabas and Saul for this ministry. They laid hands, and they split.
Yeah. And
yet they both did. I mean, where would the early church have been without Barnabas?
Yes.
I mean, he was such a catalyst and encourager. And where would we be today without a third of the New Testament that was written by Paul, an example? So sometimes it doesn't work.
One of the things that was essential to yourself and Wilma as you prepared and considered you coming to Ireland was the amount of time you invested in prayer. And I know we spoke about, that ministry is born out of an active and real, vibrant relationship with the Lord in the first. That's a foundational.
Mm-hmm.
So prayer was always, as it should be, foundational in everything you did. How important was prayer amongst the team that you built?
Thankfully, the teams that we had, there was a real openness to the gifts of the Spirit to the prophetic. And so often, and you remember those times well, we would meet together and pray extensively. And often individuals will have words of knowledge, words of wisdom, words of encouragement. Prophetic in the New Testament is to admonish, to encourage, to build up, and not to necessarily guide, but certainly be a confirmation. And so we had those powerful times of prayer, waiting on the Lord together, and we could do it right now, you and I. And we did it today with my grandson. I'm praying away, and he's getting ready to leave, and you say, "Oh no," and you begin to pray, and you had a powerful word of encouragement, like a prophetic word in his life. So I think we loved that,
Yeah.
and we encouraged that, and it was our lifeline
Yeah.
together, because even if we disagreed, we prayed well.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that was essential. And obviously, it was the burden that drove us to our knees to pray.
Yeah.
And then the vision came on our knees. But
The
oh
vi-
yeah, prayer
the,
was such a part. And
the
still
vision
is.
was always bigger than any of us could accomplish.
And
So,
I'd say, and I say to anyone that's watching this, Wilma and I made that commitment 46 years ago, and we made a commitment. We would pray and give every Thursday as much as possible
Okay.
to prayer and to fasting.
yeah.
And actually, this is Thursday, and I'm fasting today
Okay.
because we've done it for 46 years.
Yeah.
But when I read the great biographies, when I read the scriptures of the great missionaries and evangelists and apostles and so on, they all gave their time to pray, fasting, to hear from God, and then extensive times, fasting for 4 or 5 days. A great friend that I worked with, great respect for, just come off a 40-day fast.
Right.
Now, I think you got to be very wise.
Yeah.
You need to have you need to have a good physician that you look to, a GP. You get advice. Some people don't need to. Physically, they can't manage it. And I've never done a 40-day fast. I've done extensive ones, but I think it's absolutely essential, because I think you push back the plate and you're saying, God, you're more important.
Mm.
You're more important. What I've got to hear from you. And in those times, I can never remember at times of fasting that I came out of it and oh man, that was great, and I feel the anointing. Instead I just came out exhausted.
Yeah.
And but then later there would be a breakthrough.
I remember one specific incident that is just coming to my mind.
Yeah.
About fasting. Long, long time ago, I was over in LA. I was attending a church, and the Lord told me to fast, particularly fast for 3 days. So I fasted. I had no idea why. Like, it was just a sense that I
Just
really felt, I
obedience.
just felt God telling me to do it. And on the third day, I went into the church, and there was a demonic person there that was it was really terrible. He had to be brought home, and nobody in the church would go home with him. So I volunteered to go home.
You were just,
I was just a young Christian. This guy, he started kissing my arm, and he was all over me and everything like that. And I just prayed in the car journey back home. But it was after. But we got him home safely, and I was safe. I was okay.
yeah.
There was no. I mean, I didn't enjoy that at all.
Thankfully.
But, thankfully, yes.
Yeah.
But so we got him home. Everything was safe. We all went. But it was afterwards it struck me. God had me fast to prepare for that.
Amazing.
I still don't understand the principles of why.
Yes.
But fasting was critical. And my obedience to fast that time, to prepare for that time, was really. We were up against demonic forces that
Yes.
were stronger than me, but not stronger than God.
Yes.
And so that struck me. It's really, really critical. And if God tells you to fast, fast. Yeah,
Because Jesus said these things will come out with prayer and fasting.
that's right.
Yeah.
Well, Gary, thank you. This is the end of our session, and we'll have another one on looking at community building and building church very shortly. But I wanted to just thank you for being with us. Hopefully you found this encouraging and useful, and you're blessed by it. I'm certainly enjoying my conversation with Gary, and also with Gary and Wilma as well. So please do remember to hit the subscribe button and come back and join us for our next session. God bless you.